Welcome, 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 everyone, to the next episode of Breath of Life Conversations. I am so excited to have this next guest on. We have had many, many interactions together. We actually met in real life just a short time ago for our mutual friend's 50th, and that was so magical and beautiful. And I was like, oh, family, soul family.
Yeah.
Um, and I've always been really curious as to the different thought processes that different astrologers have. And so here we are being able to talk to the one and the only Gabrielle
Aw.
Celeste, who is the owner and founder of Agua Astrology. You guys, if you are looking for like the premier person to do your astrology reading, please, please, please head to the link in the show notes below. All of her stuff will be there. But book a reading with her. She's so fantastic. I have booked one with her as well and have gotten some really great feedback and information from her in relation to my natal chart. Something that I have had a lot of like looking into and stuff, and best believe I have had my share of astrologers teaching me things and whatnot, but I absolutely still hold to Gabrielle being the best. Gabby, welcome.
Okay, my Cancer heart, Abby, my Cancer heart. Thank you for just the heartwarming welcome and introduction. I'm so happy to be here and I'm so excited that this is just happening when it's happening. I know we're in Mercury retrograde shadow, but I feel like what better time to do this than Virgo season, right?
Absolutely. And as a person who has on my natal chart Mercury in retrograde, like I
Oh.
was birthed into
Mm-hmm.
this planet during that time, I never really
Mm-hmm.
struggle with Mercury retrograde. I never really have problems with tech. Usually, like if something goes funky, I usually can be like, okay, and then it tends to fix itself and all of that. Is that something that is the whole idea of Mercury retrograde something that you really like fall into as an astrologer? Or are you one of those people that are like, you know what, you can use this to your advantage?
Totally, because I love that you pointed out that you were born under Mercury retrograde because those that are born with that planet retrograde in their chart tend to do very well with Mercury retrograde. So I'm not surprised that you're sharing that, it's not an issue for you whatsoever. And it's funny because I have a couple of other girlfriends and they have the same setup and they oftentimes say it's like, well, that's only 3 to 4 times a year. So it's like I really only have things going my way, technologically speaking 3 to 4 times a year. Like I can't, right? And so I am of the belief that there's definitely to it because as above, so below. Like what the planets are doing are totally influencing how we're living our lives. However, I do think that there are ways to protect yourself, protect your technology rituals you can put in place, intentions, and I mean, sometimes it's a necessary evil in a way.
I agree. I think that everything that happens in the cosmos is something that we can use to our advantage. Which brings up a good question that I really wanted to get your opinion on. There have been some astrologers that have been quite doom and gloom, and they have kind of held to what I have noticed is kind of like an old form of astrology, really looking at almost like if I were to compare it to anything, it would be like taking a tarot deck and only reading it in reverse.
Yeah.
And then there are some, not many, but some astrologers that are really sort of breaking the mold of it, and they're really saying, you know what, we've entered into this new yuga cycle and it's really truly the golden age. It's time for us to be on the swing up. This whole age of Aquarius has started. We are in this realm of um, a rise and the new earth and all of that. And they're using all of these signs as a way to say it is time to look at astrology differently and to really truly start pushing the boundaries of what astrology can do, what it means, how it operates, how it functions, even so far as to say, you know what, we're no longer in the wheel of 12 anymore, we're in a wheel of 13. Astrology has to advance beyond what it is. And I'm curious as to what your take is.
You know, I love that question because it is kind of like it's almost kind of controversial because there are some people that are very much on the spectrum of like one end to the other and not really in between. I think if I had to identify, I would be in between because it's so interesting. Like the nature of my business, the spirit of my business, I would say, she's very much like into timelines and predictions. And so I think that would be like her area of expertise. And I'm really just the vessel for it. So I do think that like we have multiple timelines available to us. I do think that it ain't over till it's over. So nothing is really set in stone. And there is the whole concept, the rabbit hole that is this world, but the rabbit hole that is free will. So it's like I do think that that comes into effect. So I think it's gonna be so interesting to see the way that certain energies play out because and that's the beautiful thing of astrology. And I prefer to be in the know. I prefer to have an idea of what's coming up so I can at least work with that energy. So like my nervous system has a bitter adjustment to it when said time comes. And it's not always bad. It's not always, you know, what doom and gloom astrologers do predict and put out there. But I mean, I'm not going to lie though, there are some pretty gnarly conjunctions that it's like, all right, you should look for this because this is a hot spot, but how you choose to react to it, there's a lot of power within that too.
Yeah. For you and your own chart and for your clients that you've been seeing most recently, when one of those hotspots comes up, how is it that you personally like either read that, voice that? How is it that you kind of get through that moment, that idea?
Yeah. So, for an example, like I will see Saturn crossing what's called the ascendant or the rising sign, and that's a pretty big deal. And I'll just be like, hey, like traditionally, this is what this means. This is like some experiences that happen when this transit happens. However, intuitively, I'm just sensing this. So I really apply my intuition to just kind of be like, to sense like, okay, is it going to be as bad as maybe it could be? But and then kind of just go from there because I think like you and I would love to hear this and your take on it. How you deliver an intuitive reading, that's an art. Like hands down. It's like choosing the words to relay because you kind of have an idea of what's going to come, right? You understand the magnitude or the level of intensity or importance or however it is of the messages that are coming through. But it's also very important for the client or the sitter to experience that for themselves. So you can kind of give them an idea, but it's almost so important to come as neutral as possible so that they can thereby make their own decisions and act out of their free will. At least that's kind of where I stand. So I would say it's an art and it's very important to deliver messages and use certain wording accordingly.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say for me, I found that a certain type of person definitely comes to me more often, but
Mm,
being able to really tap into my clairsentience to allow me to read, okay, is this my typical sort of client, or is this somebody who just was like told, hey, you should go and see Abigail, but maybe they're not
yeah.
my quote unquote like typical or even ideal client, truly. Because I tend to be more blunt. Like I am that person that you come to when you're like, I'm done with being blown on my ass.
Yeah.
I'm done with people trying to coddle me and hold me in it. It's funny because I'm in the process of deciding my next coach, my next like mentor. And I don't do this often. It's
Yeah.
truly, I'm at a position now where my business is asking me to really be pushed in the areas that I don't necessarily know are areas for
Mm,
me to choose and to get myself to that next level. And I remember telling her, I said, I need this thing in the beginning of the month and I need this thing at the end of the month. And the thing at the end of the month is not going to be me talking so much. It's going to be you telling me this is what I saw through this past month that you need to really work on. And I said, I'm telling you that I'm not going to talk much on this because number one, I know that you're going to be telling me things that I'm going to be like, worked on that.
yeah.
I'm going to feel hurt. And I just
Yeah.
need to sit there and I just need to take it and I need to take notes. And then I need to go away for a few days
Yeah.
before our next meeting where we're actually plotting out the rest of the month and
Yeah.
the things that I need to do. And I need to get over myself because, yeah, I'm going to be human and I
Yeah.
have feelings and I'm going to be hurt by somebody who is probably wiser than I am in this particular area telling me that I didn't do so well. And I feel like I'm looking for that. because I'm that type of person and that type of
Yeah.
reader.
Yeah.
Um, but I know that not everybody is like that. And so I love I love the example that you gave there of Saturn conjuncting our rising, mostly because Saturn is the great teacher. So
Yeah.
whenever our teachers come up,
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
be like, hello, pay attention.
Yes.
And of course, being in that realm of, okay, this is how the world is perceiving you.
Yeah.
Like, let me teach you something about how the world sees you.
Yeah. Would you say, by the way, I love the way that you explain that. I'm like, is that her Virgo sun at play? Is that how it manifests for you? Because I'm like, oh, that's very structured and organized. And I'm like, and I think that's really important too, because a key part that you highlighted is like you need to digest and then integrate. And I think that's another piece that I think is really important and a takeaway from any type of reading. It's like receive that information, process, identify how it resonates, how it feels for you, reflect and move onward. And how you choose to move onward is like that's part of the free will at play as well, but I also think that's part of like just the growth that can come alongside these modalities and really leaning into yourself and just self-awareness and identification. And I really feel like that's a big part and kind of like the mechanism and maybe even the formula for doing this work.
Yes. It does make me wonder though, because yes, very much like Virgo of like, I need things to be semi-structured. Because if they're not, I tend to be like, well, let me make them structured.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things that kind of drew me to astrology because it is a structured system. But I also found as I was going through it, and maybe because when I was learning it, it was the teacher that I had teaching it to me. So I'm super excited for when you like when the world tells you, the universe tells you to create your own course, which I know has been in the works,
Yes. Yeah.
and you've been ruminating on that, because I want to take it, not because I don't know, but because, and there are definitely things I still don't know, but because I would love to see how it is that you teach it. But how I was initially taught was actually quite masculine in nature,
Oh, okay. Can we
which
talk about that? Not to cut you off, because
yes,
that is,
please, no,
yeah.
please.
Oh no, I'm so curious. I cut you off, but I'm like, please continue because I've been literally thinking my third eye is burning as I say this. I've literally been thinking about masculine, feminine, and the both energies with the application of those energies to astrology and to human design because I definitely feel like one embodies the other and vice versa, or not vice versa, but anyways, please continue.
Yes, no, like please, I actually want you to continue because that's exactly like where my question was of like, how do you envision? I don't want you to like sit and tell us like how you want to structure your course, but just the idea for you of is astrology truly a masculine system? Does it need to be taught in a masculine way in order for people to understand it? Or is this just a leftover, a product from how people have been taught
Yeah.
from their teachers, and they just decided to replicate that, or what is it? Am I, or is there something that I'm missing, basically?
So thank you. I have to remember I'm the one that's being interviewed. And for those listeners out there, please check out the podcast that we did
Yeah.
featuring Abigail on the Spiritual Sisters podcast because it was so good. And we've made references to her career and the insight as her as a nurse throughout other episodes too. So it was a good one. It's a gem. So check it out. But to answer your question, I love this because I really have been ruminating on courses and just how I want to do it because I I actually used to teach classes, fitness classes back in the day. And
Back in the
I
day. And then completely went corporate. Now I'm like trying to
well,
get out of corporate
it's
to
so
like
so it's so funny. I actually did corporate, and alongside working corporate, I did fitness classes. And my fitness classes, that money that I made, and I knew that there was like an energy there that was going to work for me beneficially to for my own personal karma in this lifetime. But I used that money to start my business. And I was working on my business and teaching fitness classes. And then I started doing readings. And now the next step is to do courses and whatnot. But what I was getting at is that I really enjoy the idea of just like understanding how people process information, how they learn. And I have this in the back of my mind, which is another reason that I haven't put together the course because I want it to be digestible. And I think that's where that masculine energy comes in. But I also want there to be an element of play, of flow, of it being how you interpret it as the astrologer and applying that within a session to help someone in need, right? So I would say if I were looking at human design and astrology, I think human design is really masculine. I think it's very
Mm.
masculine just with the system. It hasn't been around as long as astrology has. So I think that there's a lot more room for interpretation with respect to astrology, just given the history, the information available. But with respect to human design, there is a source. Like there are formal schools that certify that were basically founded and worked with the person I Ra Urahu. I feel like I always
Yes.
mess his name up. Yeah.
No,
So
that's how I pronounce it. Yeah.
yeah, okay, cool. So there are people that have literally studied under him and have taken that body of work and distributed it and taught it the way in which he intended. Right now, what we're seeing with human design is that people are interpreting it in their own way. And I'm just like, I don't know. And I feel like it really is more masculine in nature, whereas like astrology, there's more of a feminine aspect to it. So
Do
I hope
you
that answers
do
the
you think
question.
that the human design is more masculine in nature because of it encompasses more than just astrology, that it encompasses also the Kabbalah, which most people don't even really talk about unless they've been certified through the school, as well as the I Ching
I
as
think
well?
I feel like that probably has to play a role in it. I mean, how can it not? I feel as though the way in which like human design is available via, whoever's teaching it, it almost has to be very structured and organized in order to process the amount of information that is available in
Mhm.
that specific system. And that's not to say that that's not the truth for astrology because astrology has been around for thousands and thousands of years. I think it's just harder to so like basically like you'll get an idea of like what the planets represent, what the houses represent, the transits, the aspects that the planets are making to one another. If you want to get really deep, the numbers, so the degrees at which they're sitting at, and then also just the placements in the sky. So there's once you have an idea of like how it all works, then you can kind of create your own way of like moving with astrology and identifying how it wants to work with you. So for me, I feel like I move with it very much in a feminine nature, which I actually didn't really think about until like the last 2 months. So the timing of this question is perfect. But I do feel like when I initially got to, started with astrology and studying it, it almost had to be a little bit more masculine with how I learned it just to get like the basics and the rules down. But now the way that I apply it in my readings and work with just sitters and clients and anyone that's interested, I would say it's much more in a feminine way than ever before.
I personally have liked it when the people that I've asked to do or look at my natal chart, when they do operate more in that feminine aspect, mostly because I've been in my masculine for so long, but I think also because my energy and my body both understand that we're outside of that now. That, it needs to be more in flow, more in flux, even if we want to take it to almost like an extreme, but just very story based. And so like the people who have read my chart for me have done so way more in a story format in a way. I've kind of used it as a way to almost narrate my life and my future if they take it that way, than just saying, oh, so here's your sun, this is what it means, here's your moon, this is what it means. You know what I mean? Like actually being able to tell a story for my existence truly. And that was one of the things that I really enjoyed about our reading together was you had said that based off of the sign that my moon was in, it actually indicated for you, and maybe there were other aspects to it, but you had brought it up around my moon, was that I had actually volunteered to be here, that I was not that I was done with my incarnations, at least here on earth,
Hmm.
and that I was like, oh, I guess I'll go ahead and do another one. And that really resonated for me because for my entire life I was like, this doesn't this doesn't feel right to me. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck am I doing here?
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't make no damn sense. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of people. I'm tired of like this. Like I was like, I've done this one too many times, is
Yeah.
really how I would have described it.
Yeah.
And so to hear that from you was such a validation because it allowed me then to go, okay, so if truly I was done, then what is it that I'm supposed to be here for?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that changed everything. It changed how I looked at my chart because instead of looking at it as this like space where I was like, okay, so each of these things are lessons I'm supposed to learn. Well, then I was able to go and say, well, what if I had already learned this? What if I had already
Yeah.
learned it here?
Yeah.
Now with these placements, now what do I need to do with it? Like if I can understand this then, and I've already learned it, what is this telling me? And it changed everything.
Totally.
And so then of course that got me thinking then, well then where if there's more of us, if I wake up and there are more of us, to quote Hamilton, right? Where do we go from here? And so I'm interested, what are your thoughts on that for those of us that are in this space? And I know that this is something that maybe even you can, just from our conversations
Yeah.
in the past, where we're here for very specific things, for very
Totally.
specific reasons, and we know what those reasons are. Like we've woken up to it and we've
Yeah.
been working on it.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
I actually feel like, so without getting into just as to like your placements and even like mine, because and soul contracts and the Akashic records and all the things, because everything's kind of at play with this. I think we're actually about to find out within the next couple of years. I feel like there's going to be just a big shift, and what that looks like, one could make a prediction and kind of just read between the lines what we're seeing things go, at least here in the States where we're at. But again, to reference back to the beginning of our conversation, we really don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we can tell that it's going to be pretty big just because of what the planets are doing. And so 2024 has been quite an interesting kind of like in between year. Whereas the astrology for the next couple of years, definitely 2025, 2026, I feel like you and I personally are going to have just revelations as to like, oh, like this is why, alongside like the other contracts we've made within our family and personal growth for our own soul's purpose. I think on a larger world scale we're going to see like, oh, okay, this is like my contribution to the conversation that's happening, at least in this grand scheme of the world here, planet Earth. But I do think, and I feel, and I would love to know if you feel this too, since maybe end of 2019, 2020, you can see people asking themselves more as to like what their purpose is here on earth. And I feel like that question, if you haven't asked yourself that to this point, it's going to come even more to be at the more of the forefront than ever before within the next 2 to 3 years, I would say.
Oh, I absolutely agree. I think that there's a lot of us, particularly within our generation, that it so, and for anybody who's wondering, we're millennials, okay? Um, and we're some of those rare millennials that don't have children.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Um, I think it's definitely going to be something that stops being a question anymore. I think that there are a lot of us that, as you said, it's it was something that we had been asking ourselves. I think that there's a section of us that we asked that question, then we figured it out.
Hmm.
And now we're doing it. And I think that what is coming is really going to be an avenue, an opportunity for us to actually make very, very big strides in that, whatever that is, whether it's a building thing, whether it's a growth thing, whether it's a culmination thing. Um, and I think for those people who have been asking but haven't figured out or just haven't been asking at all, I think they're not going to really have a choice. I think that's going to become a thing.
Yeah.
I think they
That's
have to.
very well said. Yes.
They're going to have to. And truly I think because of the fact that the world is going to put a lot of pressure on on us, on everybody
Yeah.
collectively.
Yeah.
And that pressure is something that a few generations are able to sustain. those older generations. I think that they were very used to a particular time of thing, being controlled, being assessed, being told what to do, how to live, type of a deal. And they were okay with that. And there are some souls that are still in those generations and they're still okay with that. But the other generations, the generations that come after them, they're used to a little bit more freedom. They're used to more change, truly.
Yeah.
And that may actually brings me to my next question for you is there change like in your mind? Like, can you see change happening in relation to astrology as it is? Like, for example, one that like always like sticks with me, and then I'm like really curious as to your answer about this is like, would we see a reintroduction to like the constellation Orpheus and
Oh
having a
gosh.
13 wheel, a 13
Oh
constellation?
my
Do you
gosh.
think that that would ever happen, or is there other changes to astrology that maybe
I fe-
were are on the outlook?
you know how there's you know how like in the corporate world where there's a structure of like, just like pay grades and all that, and you can like pass the buck and be like, that's above my pay grade. I feel like I have to like pass the buck to astrologers that have been doing this longer than me. I'm not going to rule it out. I feel like anything could happen, but I will say I do think that astrology, human design are going to be even more hot topics of conversation within the next 3 years, like hands down.
Yeah.
So I could see it. I could see that happening. So we'll see.
It's it's so interesting because it's so interesting that you say that like maybe older generation part of me actually kind of doesn't want the older generations to like have it like the people who have been studying astrology for a really long time, only because I feel like sometimes what ends up happening is like they're so staunch in it, they're like
Yeah.
they're so entrenched in what they know that learning something new, adding in another constellation or whatever would just be way too much for them. And they're like, I can't even conceive of a 13 constellation
Right.
wheel and then having to figure out like placements and all that and what does that mean and all of that. And so for anybody who's listening, if you are feeling the call, this
Yeah.
is your invitation to go and like see like is this like actually your path? Maybe this is your purpose.
That would just like mess me up because my whole brand is based on my big three. So if it were to change my big three, no. I'm like, I love being a triple water sign. That changes everything. So, I mean, who's to say? I think anything can happen.
And that's so interesting. And so I don't mean to pick on you. I don't
Yeah,
mean for this
sure.
to come across as me picking on you, but the tie of the how you're identifying. Do you think that that is something that is entrenched in all of us, that that idea of identity is like such a thing? And as an intuitive who probably also tells people, teaches their clients, what, let go, surrender, how
Yeah. Yeah.
it's so kitschy. um but but how does that like play in your brain?
So, like, identifying with what my chart is, you mean? Is that the question?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
like being like, I identify as a triple water sign,
Yeah.
and being like, I really can't.
I, you
I,
know,
I don't know what I do.
it's so interesting because I do think, and this is where actually I'm at in my personal journey. It's like, okay, yes, I have this astrology, my chart to as a tool to better understand myself, but I'm also kind of like, if I were to take this away and I didn't have that, who would I be aside from this, So I'm kind of trying to get to this place of detachment. So I don't know that I have a clear answer for you just yet, but for me, it was definitely like the gateway drug, the tool that got me to better understand myself and have language to do that for myself when I didn't feel like I had the support or those around me weren't able to articulate that for me during my awakening. So it really did just it helped me process like those intrusive thoughts and the anxiety that my Virgo placements can sometimes give me.
you guys, truly, if you're listening, I don't anticipate that anybody is going to be changing the constellations anytime soon or adding anything to them. But I can only imagine that it must feel the way that's like yogis feel when people start saying, well, there's 30, like because I was like, there's an infinite number of chakras. I just happen to be able to access, or 39 inches above that, right? And to be able to like know that for myself, of like, this is where I can access and this is where I can feel the difference and I can map it out and I can read it and all that. But it must be weird for people who are like, no, there are only 7 chakras.
Yeah,
I'm like, oh
right?
God,
I know.
like, so
Okay.
I completely understand it fundamentally changes a lot of things. And
Yeah.
it is certain. I mean, I also can think it would be like saying, well, there are actually 80 cards in tarot instead of 78.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I all of a sudden, like, the structure of it is something that it's not even about so much of like you can't learn new tricks. It's a more of just, well, what is this system then? You right? And
And
like,
then they also it's the idea, something that just came up is like, well, they're always finding new planets, and then they like debunked Pluto as a planet. Well, it's like, well, motherfucker, I'm still gonna work with Pluto, so I don't know.
that's such a good point. I mean, there's billions of stars in the sky, right?
Mhm.
And tens of billions of planets that surround those stars. And
Yeah.
that actually is a great segue. I'm interested in how you feel about the different star systems and the different planetary systems, stuff that exists out there. Like, how do you end up thinking about, okay, well, we're not the only life that exists in the cosmos.
Hmm. Hmm.
And if you're not, I'm like, I know you are, I know you believe that with me.
Hmm. Hmm. I was like,
But
yep.
for those listening, if you don't, you're probably the wrong place to listening for 15 minutes. um but with that understanding, of we're not the only ones out there, how are you kind of processing all of this information that have been quote unquote coming out with
Right.
the government saying, yes, there is intelligent life out there? Like, do you think it's just them acting ridiculous? How do you feel that it's them trying to pull one over on us again? How do you feel about that?
It's so funny you say that, because I was actually going to be where I was going to go with an answer right before you said it. So maybe like intuitively, I was just like anticipating that. But it's so, okay. So maybe this is going to be like a little bit judgmental, but I have a hard time with the school of thought that humans and planet Earth are the only form of life in space, right? And I'm just like, no, like I feel like that's a little bit of the human arrogance that comes into play. And I do think that the government, they know more than they're sharing. So I hope that this doesn't get flagged on YouTube. But
And honestly, I don't really care if it does.
yeah.
Come
Right.
for me, bitches.
Right.
Come
I'm
for
like,
me.
you're so protected. I'm like, they aren't gonna do anything. But I just feel like they know more. They're not sharing. And like, yeah, I could see them trying to pull one over on us. Like there's definitely aliens out there. And
Yeah.
we've had a couple of guests, one in particular where his guide is like a 10,000-year-old Arcturian, and
Nice.
he connected with her. We have it on recording and everything on the podcast. And I have other girlfriends, healers that we both know, that specifically work with extraterrestrial beings and that form of consciousness. And so I think to not consider that there is other forms of consciousness and life outside of the human being experience is a little bit arrogant and ignorant.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. And I truly am of the opinion too that like, while time is an illusion, that there are multiple forms of time, that we can access time in different ways. I also think that the universe utilizing time as a linear form means that those beings out there, if they're able to get here, if they're able to communicate through us, whether as a trans channel or just as a channel or just as a connection, are much more advanced than us. They're not
Oh
operating
my
in the
God.
same
Totally.
in the same way, and therefore to be like, oh yeah, Area 51 is the space where you can find a little green man or a big tall gray man is quite ignorant as well.
Mhm.
It would mean that they had the technology to get here and be captured,
Yeah.
which I mean, there I think that there is a possibility that something in their tech went wrong and they crash landed here and they died in impact. But to have it be this whole we're protecting ourselves from invasion is nonsense.
No. No.
It's absolute
I'm
nonsense.
like, they are light years ahead of us in just knowledge, capability, skill set. Like, no, yeah.
Yeah.
If they want to be found, it's probably like on a strategic, for a strategic reason on their part. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's its own rabbit hole too. Like, there's thoughts that the government is working with ET and that form of consciousness, where I'm just like, okay, that's not my area of expertise. But to say that I do think that they are out there, absolutely. I
Mhm.
do think that they're more evolved than we are for sure. And I'm curious to see, just what that what alien life potentially making contact and it being like a publicly known, maybe like internationally known thing on planet Earth, if that would be something that comes up in the next couple of years, because I could see that happening.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that there has been quite a few trans channels that have like brought that up. I know Bashar is one where it's like 2036, between 2030 and 2040 is kind of like this full disclosure moment. And I'm all like, okay. And I'll be alive when that comes around. So we'll just see. Like, I close no doors, but
Yeah.
I also understand that the thing that most people tend to ignore, which is humans have a really bad tendency to take things and change them to
Yeah.
suit them, you
Yeah.
know? And that's where I think for me, even utilizing tools like astrology is important, but it's also really important to push the boundaries too. Like
Yeah.
I like to tell people, you might think that you're completely healthy, but why stop there?
Yeah.
Why not like shoot off into the stratosphere and see just how good it can get? So from your perspective as an astrologer, looking at a chart, what would that look like if you were a person who is saying, okay, so I understand my natal chart. For you, what does it look like to say, okay, now that I understand this, how much better can it get?
So when you say how much better can it get, what do you mean by that? Like
So
for their
like
set experience?
So like if you're looking at your chart and you're saying, okay, I know how to utilize this.
Yeah.
I know how to utilize this to kind of understand, who I am as a person. I know how to look at this and say, I know what lessons I'm supposed to learn based off of where my planets are and what houses they're in. And I understand where my struggles are going to be. Understanding that and having worked with it, right? Now you go, okay, my life is good, right? I know what to expect. I know when to watch out for things, all that stuff. But what does it look like as a person who's saying, okay, I'm looking at this now and I want to go the next step. I want it to be better than better. Where would you suggest somebody look at to go to that next level to say this is better?
So, I mean, if you have the chart, you understand it, you get an idea of what's coming and you're content, like, you know, just continue living that human experience because I think that's also equally as important. And I think I know I would have been annoyed. I was annoyed. So when I was told this, a year and a half ago, when I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, can't believe I signed up for this. But, one of my girlfriends was like, it's just as important to honor the human experience. And she's completely right. I think if you're really taking it to the next level, understanding your chart, I would look at either your north node. So look at the placement of the north node, the house that it's in, what that house represents, and then the sign that it's in and what that sign can also represent. And then I also would probably look at to as another supporting placement and or piece to your chart, I would look at the rising sign, really look at the essence of the rising sign and what that's asking of you and alongside everything else that's going on in your chart. Your rising sign is also going to have its own planetary ruler, so that's going to be different for everyone. I would look at that. And then I think finally I would also look at the sun placement, and I would kind of just combine all of them and really sit with that and be like, okay, this is what this means, this is what that means, and this is what that means. How does this all come together, the synthesization of all of these placements, and how can I really move forward to the next level? And I do think over the course of time, it does translate differently depending on where you're at in your human journey. So hopefully that's clear.
Oh, that's so much, especially since for a lot of people, the sun and the rising are something that they have been looking at for a really long time. That's the thing that they, when they read their horoscopes, that's what they're looking at. And
Yeah.
they're, very aware and very conscious, or so they think, about those signs and about those placements. And so I love that you're basically bringing it back, saying what you think you might not know. So
Yeah, and you know what, Abby, thank you for saying that because that was something else that I feel intuitively called to share. I have looked at my chart. I look at it frequently. My teachers are like, I look at my chart every day, right? I don't think I look at my chart that often, but I look at it enough to be able to confidently say that I learned something new about myself in my chart every single time I look at it, because that's how much depth there is. And that's why it's one of the best tools to have and just to understand. And I love that it's so wild. Like when I started this, at least within, my area of like where I live, the people around me, even on my Instagram, like people really didn't know what it was. And I'm like, really? So it's interesting to see it get the attention that it's gotten in the last couple years and hopefully even more in the next couple. And I would just say that there's just infinite layers to know and to unlock within your chart. And I don't think it's possible to fully understand it completely just because of the information that's available.
I love this. You guys, it has been such an incredible journey. I know that I'm going to have her back on.
Oh,
Gabby is a treasure. We've only been able to scratch the surface of this
totally.
particular podcast episode. So please, please, please don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share this to anyone who needs it. Definitely go back and re-listen to the last like 10 minutes of this and really like take what Gabby is saying to heart. If you are interested in astrology, if you're interested in going the next step, really, really take a moment to go back into your chart, take a look at it. And of course, also go and book with her. She can help you with this too, you guys, and do it in such a way as to like blow your mind. So go ahead and check down in the show notes. All of her links and stuff are there, to her website, to her offerings, all the things, right? And as well as ways to follow her. Her and her sister do this amazing podcast called the Spiritual Sisters Podcast, and I've been on it. It's a brilliant. I listened to it. I really am excited now to like go and listen to it because I'm not. They have so many episodes, guys. I have not gotten up with everything, but but I want to go and listen to that one that you were talking about with the trans channel. That would be awesome. I'm so excited for that. You guys, it has been such a treat and a pleasure, and I will see you next time. Bye.